Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Political Alchemy and our first podcast. And for those of you who are new to Political Alchemy, this is a new channel that aims to bring you high quality political content and analysis from an authentic Muslim and Islamic perspective. Today, we want to discuss the issue around the petrodollar, particularly when there's been a certain level of social media hype around the claims that Saudi have ended their petrodollar treaty with the United States. Is this true, or is this just some social media speculation? More importantly, what is the petrodollar? Why is it important? And does an end of the petrodollar signal the end of the American empire? Joining me to discuss this topic is Adnan Khan, who runs the Geopolity website and podcast and who has written many articles and papers around political and economic issues, particularly those affecting the Muslim world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Adnan.
Walaikum salam, Sharif.
Jazakallah khair for coming and answering, hopefully inshallah giving us some enlightenment in terms of this particular really important topic. Adnan, I think it's best place maybe to start is to really explain what is the petrodollar and how it came to shape the world that we live in today.
Okay, so the petrodollar is the term given to an arrangement that took place in 1974 between Saudi Arabia and America. Now, all countries have their own currencies, and what the petrodollar was, it wasn't actually a new currency. It was an arrangement between two countries, and this arrangement was given the term the petrodollar. So prior to the petrodollar, what you had was a system where just after World War II, America established this system, the global liberal order, and it made its currency the central or the premier currency. And the reason why I was able to do this is because America had most of the world's gold. And if you wanted to exchange your currencies for gold, then America was prepared to do that for $35 an ounce. That system continued until the Vietnam War, where America began printing way more dollars than it had gold. As a result of this, a number of countries from Europe started withdrawing a lot of their gold reserves in America. And in 1971, the Richard Nixon government, they put an end to converting gold into dollars. And as a result, they faced a problem. Why would the whole world need to keep dollars if America wasn't converting gold into dollars anymore? And this is where the Nixon administration, they turned to the Saudis. And why Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia was emerging as one of the largest producers of oil. It already, if I remember at the time, had the largest oil reserves in the world. So if Saudi Arabia only took dollar as payment for its oil exports, then that gives another reason for countries in the world to actually keep large reserves of the dollar. Well, so what that meant was the petrodollar means America's domestic currency is demanded by everybody else. So where other countries would have to exchange their currency for the dollar, well, America prints the dollar. It doesn't have to exchange anything. So if any country wanted to buy oil, they would have to buy dollars first and then purchase oil from Saudi Arabia, being the largest producer at the time in the world. So that's really how the petrodollar came about in 1974.
Could you maybe explain a bit more in terms of why the petrodollar and how this affects international trade and why international trade is done in the dollar? I know you sort of touched upon it, but could you sort of explain about, the petrodollar international trade, the dollar itself, and how this really serves American interest?
So many commodities that are made around the world, they're all different sizes. Oil by far is the largest commodity market in the world. So if the largest oil producer is only taking dollar as payment, and the only way to get hold of oil, which is a very important commodity, it was an important commodity then, it's an important commodity today, then it means that every country needs to be purchasing dollars and have large reserves of dollars. So that from that perspective, it created a demand for dollars. Where this helps America is the global system we have, because the dollar is the currency everybody uses to buy goods and services, to make imports and exports, to buy international commodities, to speculate on the financial markets. It now means if you fall foul of America, like Cuba did, like North Korea has, like Iran has, and like Russia has now, what America can do, it can cut you off from the global economy. So to give an example, Russia now is the most sanctioned country in history. And the reason why that's possible is America's domestic currency, the dollar. America has made it illegal for anyone in the world to use their currency to trade with Russia. So they've literally cut Russia off from the global economy. Now, you could trade in your own domestic currencies. It's perfectly allowed. It's not illegal. But what countries found from the 70s and 80s is if they need dollars to buy oil, well, then they might as well just do international trade in dollars as well. And they might as well just trade in other goods and services in dollars because they're going to need dollars for oil anyway. And because oil is the world's largest commodity market, this arrangement made sense for most countries. And it meant that America was in a very unique position. So Iran now has been cut off from using dollars. And this has a knock-on effect. The banking system around the world, the reporting of financial transfers, all of this is mostly done in dollars because most countries were trading in the dollar. So by Saudi using the dollar as the only form of payment for its oil, it had a knock-on effect where this spread to other markets and other industries. So that puts America, whose currency is the currency of choice for all the markets in the world, it puts them in a very unique position. They can cut you off. They don't like you. If you don't join an alliance they're making, they can cut you off. And if they really don't like you, they'll cut you off and you could become a Venezuela. You could become a Sri Lanka. You could become a Pakistan until you came into line with what their policies were. So really, currencies is an economic subject area. But what you find is America weaponized this economic tool and use it for its political goals.
From my understanding, Adnan, the way the international trade works is effectively if one country, let's say China, wants to trade with another country, let's say Argentina, they'll do it in the dollar, or maybe not China to a lesser extent nowadays, but certainly another country, they'll do it in a dollar. And in order to do that, they will use a bank in China, which will have a bank that it refers to in America, which deals with these types of transfers. And then the bank, the Argentinian bank, will also have a bank in America as well. So the money goes from China to America. Then the bank in America will then transfer that money to an Argentinian bank, and then Argentinian company or government will then receive it. Is that how it works? So every international trade that's done in the dollar bypasses and goes through the American banking and financial system.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily geographically have to go through America, but there are American banks that will be part of the process because these countries have access to the dollar, and that's how the banking system works. Now, in the example you used, why would Argentina and China in a trade deal not trading each other's currencies? So why would Argentina not take payment in its own currency or the Chinese currency and vice versa? The reason why they don't do this is there's a couple of reasons for this, really. First thing is if I buy stuff from China and I pay China in the Argentinian currency, well, there's nothing China can do with the Argentinian currency unless they're making payments to Argentina. And if it's the other way around, what's Argentina going to do with the Chinese currency? Because that's not the currency within Argentina. So if you pay in dollars, well, you need dollars now because oil is priced in dollars. International commodities are priced in dollars and international finance is priced in dollars. So because of that, what people did or what countries did, they started using the dollar in other areas, which was not part of the original petrodollar agreement. So that made the American dollar, it put it in a very unique position. In a way, Sharif, the dollar is basically a lubricant in trillions of transactions every day. So if America bans you, cuts you off, you have a massive problem. And because it's been a few decades now, what you find is no other systems have developed instead of the dollar because everyone was happy. Let's just keep using the dollar. Until now, which I'm sure we're going to discuss, because countries can see America's weaponizing the dollar, now there's a lot more talk. Maybe we need to set up other payment systems. Maybe we need to set up other reporting systems and actually use other currencies.
Yeah, because again, in terms of this point about why the dollar, why America benefits from the dollar system is because all the countries have to have a reserve of dollars, and the reserves of dollars are generally kept in these special banks that are used for transfers, American banks, then America basically holds on to the basically, like, it's the wealth, these hundreds of billions of dollars worth of wealth that are owned by other countries, and that other countries might use to buy, US Treasury bonds, as an example, to lubricate basically the American financial system. Isn't that the case, Adnan?
So effectively, yep. And I can give you two examples to illustrate that. The first one was when the Taliban took over in 2021. When they took over the central bank, they went to the central bank and they said, "Where are the 9 billion reserves we have?" And someone had to explain to them, it doesn't exist in physical form. It's sitting in bank accounts in America. And I think it took the Taliban a little while to get their head around that. The second example is, just this week, there's talk of Russia's reserves, which are into the hundreds of billions.
$300 billion, yeah.
$300 billion, and they're saying that they're going to use that to reconstruct Ukraine. Now, how is that possible? Because the reserves Russia had, they're sitting in Western banks. They're not sitting in Russia. So therefore, when they've sanctioned Russia now, Russia physically can't even get its own reserves. And those are two examples, really, just to illustrate that.
Wow. So, we talk about the petrodollar and this Saudi agreement. Why didn't Saudi just turn around to America and say, we don't want to trade in the dollar. You're going to buy our oil, buy it in the Saudi rial instead? Why was the agreement made that it was to do with it would be bought in dollars? Why not the Saudi currency?
So that's absolutely valid question. Any normal country would have taken payment in their own currency, would have made their currency much more stronger. Now, the problem with Saudi Arabia, and this really goes to the inception of Saudi Arabia, you got to remember this whole Middle East region, really all the countries we have today, the Gulf nations, Saudi, Jordan, really, the rule of these countries are tribesmen who used to all fight each other, and they happened to get into power, but they collaborated with the powers of the day. So even though Saudi Arabia came to existence, the Gulf nations came to existence, Jordan, Iraq, these tribal families or clans that became the rulers, they were still worried that there were threats on their borders. The Saudis have always worried in Jordan could be a threat, the Gulf nations could be a threat. So in this region, historically, even once they became nations, they were looking for security guarantees. Any power in the world, if they could provide them with arms and provide them with security guarantee, they were prepared to work with them. So in 1945, Ibn Saud, famously, he went on an aircraft carrier with President Roosevelt, and they cut a deal where the Americans would give a leg up to the Saudi monarchy, and in return, Saudi will give them access to their oil fields. When Richard Nixon came knocking in the 1970s, he said, look, we guarantee your monarchy, but in return, what we want is for you to only accept dollars for payment for oil. And the dollars that you're going to accumulate, can you buy our treasury bonds as well? And at the moment, Sharif, there are deep negotiations going on between MBS and America for a modern security guarantee. The only difference this time is Saudis don't just want a security guarantee. They want to transfer some nuclear reactor technology. Saudi has agreed this, that in return, we will normalize relations with Saudi. So what Saudi is doing, like all of our rulers in the region and beyond, they're only thinking about themselves, their monarchy. And so they feel if America gives us a guarantee to protect us, if it comes to it, we will remain in power. So they gave up. I mean, just think about this, Sharif. Richard Nixon didn't go to Japan. He didn't go to UK, he didn't go to France when they needed help in the 1970s. He went to Saudi Arabia because they knew Saudis in such a unique position with all this oil wealth. Unfortunately, the Saudis, I think, Sharif, don't even realize the strategic tool they've got in their hand. Rather, what they've done is they handed the keys of their resources over to America. As long as they stay in power, they were satisfied. And unfortunately, that's the situation we have.
And I also assume that Saudi has hundreds of billions of dollars in American banks as well. So now they're tied to the American system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking, monopoly figures now. The amount of shares they own in the key companies in America, the amount of reserves, cash reserves they have in American banks. And these are the ones, their sovereign wealth fund they have. A lot of it really, I mean, you see now Saudi wants to buy out global tennis. It's bought out global golf. all of Saudi monies are sitting over there, and Western, American corporate directors, the American government, life couldn't be better. You've got Saudi funding and investing economic projects. They're not even using their own money.
So then maybe this goes on to the question now. So in terms of the claim that the treaty has ended between Saudi and America for the use of petrodollars, how true is this then? Was there an actual treaty between Saudi and America?
So the bad news is, Sharif, everyone that was hoping, the final nail in America, the dollar, we're here. It looks as though it's not the case. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, Sharif, there's been no crash in the foreign currency markets. If Saudi was ending backing the dollar, the financial markets would have crashed. There's been no crash whatsoever. Secondly, Sharif, there's been no announcement, officially or unofficially, or through roundabout ways from Saudi or from America as well. In fact, Sharif, if you look at a lot of the coverage of this, it's coming from a lot of sources which are very pro-Chinese, very pro-Russia, very pro-BRICS organization. And a lot of this talk is on social media online. In the real world, there is no discussion of this going on. And finally, Sharif, the petrodollar was not a formal agreement. It's not like the Marshall Plan, where funds were put down for specific projects. There's timeline, there's measurements, a department was set up. The petrodollar was not like the Al Yamama arms deal Britain had with Saudi, where Saudi would supply them Britain oil in return for F-16 fighter jets. In that project, they were clear timeline. There were even fines defined in the contract if there's any delays. The petrodollar is not that contract. The petrodollar is, wink, wink, we need some help and we'll protect you. And Saudi nodded and said, oh, okay, that sounds good. There's no accountability. There's no measurements. There's no how much is Saudi buying? How is Saudi meeting his side of the deal? It wasn't that sort of deal. This was, a gentleman's agreement. We've come knocking. We're America. We have the CIA. We won World War II. We're a global power. And we need your help. And yeah, we'll give you a leg up again. We gave your father a leg up. It'd been sold. So I think it was King Faisal or a couple of his other brothers. They were the ones that made this deal. So, as much as many people hope this was the next nail in the coffin for America, it looks though there's not much truth to it. And it wasn't a formal agreement. There's no deadline to this sort of agreement.
So there was no treaty. That's sort of this claim that it was a 50-year-long treaty and now it's suddenly come to an end and Saudi don't want to renew it. All of that is just social media hype and talk, which seems to be being promoted by certain accounts, and some of those may come from China and Russia, or backed by China and Russia.
Or people who, you've got a whole community out there that feels the Western-led order is bad for the world, and everything China or Russia do is a good thing for the world. It's leading to the end of the Western Bloc, and that's why everything's interpreted in this lens. The rise of the East and the decline of the West. Like I said, MBS is in deep talks at the moment for the 21st century security arrangement. If they were getting rid of the dollar, that agreement wouldn't be happening. And I think more importantly, the currency market hasn't crashed. If Saudi's been giving a leg up to the dollar, this would be a major issue. It's not. So, unfortunately, burst a few bubbles. This may just be social media talk.
Right. So, but obviously for the last decade or so, there has been a lot of talk about the dollar's demise. Even politicians have talked about this. IMF may have written about this in certain reports about the demise or the de-dollarization, or I think Mahathir Mohamad, who was the former prime minister of Malaysia when he was prime minister, talked about a basket of currencies to try to overcome the dollar. So why is there constant talk about the dollar's demise? Why is this the case?
So I think really since at least the 90s, there's been talk from various countries. You had the Gulf nations, you had Russia, you had China. They can see that the global order we have, America's at the center. And the dollar is effectively one of the key tools that they use to maintain this order. And at least the last decade, we've seen America use the dollar as a weapon more and more. We've seen them use this against North Korea, against Iran, and against Russia now. So China, especially since it's developed, it's become a large global economy. It's the biggest trader with most countries in the world. What it's realized is that America could really utilize the dollar as a weapon. It already is with other countries. It could use it with them. So the call for changing this status quo has really, really grown. But at the moment, they've not been able to propose an alternative. There's talk of alternatives. There's talk of alternative architecture. And there is probably a general agreement. You're right. There's a consensus that the dollar's a problem because it's used politically. But more importantly, Sharif, the dollar's global position, if you just look at the American economy, its debt is more than its GDP, its economic wealth. America's economic situation isn't great. So why is a country with so much debt, with economic troubles, why is their currency the global premier currency? So because of this, there's a lot more call, and this is even from neutral people, even people who are not pro-Chinese, pro-Russia, they can see that the American dollar, its position is out of sync with the economic reality of America. But we have to keep in mind, because America was the last man standing after World War II, they were able to establish this order without any opposition. The only opposition probably was from the Soviet Union for a short period of time. After 1991, really, there's been no one able to challenge it. And the order is, 70 years old now. So absolutely, the call for the dollar's position being a problem has grown. It's probably going to continue to grow. However, the dollar became the premier currency because America was the last man standing. And then Saudi came and gave it a leg up. So in order for you to change this, you're going to need to come up with another currency that can do everything the dollar's doing. And at the moment, no country wants their currency to be the global currency, because it means you'd have to produce so much of your currency the whole world could use. That would have a big impact on your own economy. It'll have an impact on inflation. It'll have an impact on your trade. So whilst the talk is growing, this doesn't necessarily translate into tangible action. But as we know, Sharif, tangible action all starts from the talk of there is a problem, it's getting worse, and we need to solve it. So that is the direction we are heading in, absolutely.
I know you've touched upon this, but why don't states just simply demand trade in their own currency? Why do they, simply accept the American dollar? If that's the case, if the debt of America is growing, there's concerns about its economy, why don't they just say, okay, we'll just do our own agreements amongst each other?
So we're seeing some of this. So for example, Russia and China now, before all of their trade was in dollars, now less than 50% is in dollars. They use their own currency, and it's actually shrinking. Saudi Arabia now trades with China using Chinese currency and their own currency as well. So there is a bit of movement. There's probably a long way to go. I mean, the Atlantic Council, just this week, Sharif, it publishes figures on the use of the dollar. And it's still saying 66% of global reserves in banks are in dollars. 80% plus of transactions, trade, is in dollars. So people are still using the dollar. Legally, politically, economically, there's nothing stopping anyone. The only difference is I'm a country, I need dollars to buy oil. So if I'm exporting, it just makes sense you pay me in dollars, but then I can use that to buy oil. If you pay me in any other currency, I will still have to sell the currency to get dollars to buy oil. So that shows you, until you don't price oil in a different currency, this probably isn't going to change.
I suppose also the other thing is that if so many countries have their reserves in the dollar, to then try to move away from the dollar to cause the dollar as a result would probably crash. Wouldn't that be the case? So that would mean that the wealth of these nations would also crash. So it now become their interest. They're now tied to the dollar and the strength of the dollar. They wouldn't necessarily want to see it crash unless they've completely, removed the dollar from their own, they're no longer holding any dollars basically.
Yeah, so China's economic rise has been built upon its biggest export market was America. And that's why for a short period, China had the largest reserves of dollars at one point, because the whole world was paying it in dollars. But it now realizes that America can sanction you. So I think China now isn't the largest holder of American treasuries now. I think it's Japan now, but it's reducing slowly. China now is buying more and more gold. It's shifting away. But the world now has seen that America, the position of the dollar, effectively America's using it as a weapon now, and that's a problem. For a long period, people didn't really understand this, didn't understand the ramifications. Now that America can cut you off from international trade. Literally, what America's saying is you can't use our domestic currency for you to trade. So you'd think, why don't you just use your own currencies? But again, when I sell to China, there's nothing China can do in my currency. If China sells to me in its currency, I can only use that currency in China. And I've got to trade with the world. I need oil. I need other resources in my country. So it puts the American currency in a very, very, very unique position.
So what about in terms of China then? China seems to be a nation that many consider will replace the dollar. What do you think to that in terms of its prospects?
So for the moment, the way China has developed for the last 2-3 decades, it's really controlled the exchange rate of its currency. It's kept it low. So Chinese exports are really, really cheap. So China has a lot of restrictions on its currency still. You can't actually get access to Chinese currency in a lot of the world. There's limits on how much money you can take into China. And when you take your money to China, there's a lot of restrictions taking it out. So China does this because China has other economic objectives. It's got to keep its economy going in a certain way, the model it actually has. So the Chinese currency will not be the alternative currency. So all the talk from China that we need an alternative currency, absolutely right. But they're not proposing that their currency should be that alternative. Because if you think about it, Sharif, the dollar, I think 70-80% of the dollars used every day has got nothing to do with America. It's used by the world in their transactions. So China will have to print so much of its own currency so the whole world can use it. If it does that, the price of its own goods will go through the roof, and its whole economic model is based upon cheap exports to the rest of the world. What China is trying to do is get other countries to agree that this is a problem. And maybe there can be a basket of currencies, or somebody else can present their currency as an alternative. But China, for the moment, it talks about the problem of America, but it's not doing the tangible actions necessary. And that's because its economy, where it is very different to this debate about the dollar as a problem.
Right. What about, really quickly, what about the Russian ruble?
The Russian ruble, Sharif, no one has any credibility in the Russian ruble. In fact, if I was to agree to sell you something today in the Russian ruble, by the time we've done the transaction, I've got the goods, the exchange rate of the ruble would change so much, it wouldn't have even been worthwhile.
Right. And what about in terms of, some argue about a different type of currency, something which is issued maybe by the IMF or the World Bank, maybe something like that could be a basis. CBDCs.
So the internal currency, so you become an IMF member, and IMF members have their own currency internally. It's called the SDR, special drawing rights. The problem is special drawing rights really is a currency used by nations who trade. It's not trade, it's nations within the IMF, and it's financial institutions. Now, if you could take it out of the IMF and broaden it, then that's a possibility. But everyone who's a member of the IMF and the World Bank, they just view the SDR, special drawing right, as an internal currency in the IMF and the World Bank. They don't see it as something that we can use as consumers every day. In a way, you could say, Sharif, it's a currency used between banks, but not between people.
Right.
The other option you've also got is, obviously you've got Bitcoin, you've got cryptocurrency that's being proposed. So the global financial system we have, you have central banks in the middle, and they deal with printing money and money supply. What cryptocurrency is, and which Bitcoin is one of them, is you decentralize it. There's no central bank. And that was the whole theory behind it. They want to get rid of central banks, but it puts them in a very, very unique position. But who's going to issue this currency? How are we going to ensure there's enough currency in the world? So cryptocurrency, the way it's designed, it's designed for me and you as individuals who want to trade with each other amongst many other currencies. It's not really designed to become the only currency, because we need to ensure there's enough currency in the world. We need to ensure there's sufficient currency for people to trade. Nobody really controls the supply of Bitcoin. So it's a completely different model. So that's not really suitable to be a global currency. And I think the last thing you mentioned was CBDCs, central bank digital currency.
So Adnan, in terms of what about CBDCs, you mentioned special drawing rights. So what you're basically saying that these are IMF currencies, and these are between financial institutions and countries. These are not ordinary people or companies or international, multinational companies that can use that. And also, I think the other point was that IMF and the World Bank, these types of international organizations, they are largely funded by America. So America really, unless they wanted to shift away from the dollar's international trade. They wouldn't allow that to happen from the IMF. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so in terms of the CBDCs, could you just explain what that is and whether that could be an alternative?
So I mentioned before, cryptocurrencies is where it's all decentralized. There's no central bank. CBDC, central bank digital currencies, is the central bank's response to cryptocurrency. It's their electronic form of money, but it's controlled by the central banks. So what that means is we completely get rid of notes on coins. You have an app on your phone, and the central bank controls money supply. So what this means is there's no more need for normal banks on the high street anymore. The central bank will actually deal with payments and things like that. So CBDCs are getting a bit of a bad name because it means that the central banks, who are the problem of the whole system we have, they will have so much control. They know every transaction taking place. And many people saw the lockdowns where a lot of this was being proposed as they can control who gets what money. If you've got certain opinions, they can restrict your money as well. The other problem is they've trialed CBDCs in a couple of places. So in El Salvador and Nigeria, and the result wasn't great. In El Salvador, people didn't even take it. They refused to, because people want physical cash. They want to be able to touch their money in their bank account. And these are countries where there's not even enough electricity. So how are you going to make payments when you couldn't even charge your phone? Then they tried the Ainara, if I'm saying it correctly, in Nigeria. And what they did was they were giving Nigerians normal money to try and push them to buy this cryptocurrency. Nobody did. So I think there's some way to go for this year, but the central banks are really, really pushing CBDCs because it will put them at the center of the economy. And cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin were designed to move away from the central bank model where things are completely decentralized. So in a way, CBDC, Sharif, is the central bank's response to cryptocurrencies.
Right. Adnan, really briefly, I know it's a really big topic, but then what future is there? Is it just simply we just have to accept that America will have the dollar's international trade, that it will benefit for it, it will maintain its American empire and global reach, it's able to influence? What's the future? How do we unseat this empire and this intrusive economy that's being pushed upon the Muslim world particularly?
So I think the direction we're going in is already started. The fact that there are question marks over America's economic situation, about the tools that they use in the global economy, that's actually the starting point, because 2-3 decades ago, that wasn't even a discussion. I actually think, Shub, there's a good possibility America will self-destruct in this area itself anyway. Its debt is more than its economy. Half of America refused to accept the last election result. Half of America probably won't accept the election result this time. So if America gets more and more dysfunctional, then America's global tools, there will also be question marks over that as well. So although on paper, there's a lot of tools in place that America still uses, but all of these tools are based upon America remaining the superpower. If there's any change in that status, really, why would we use the dollar when there's question marks if the American government can even pay off its bills? This is the country that has regular government shutdowns over these issues as well. And finally, Sharif, the dollar's global role began with World War II. That's what led to a global balance of power change. So unless there's an event which leads to global balance of power change, then there won't be any alternative. So this is why there's a lot of anti-China feeling in America. The feeling is China's rising as a power. China's trying to align with certain other countries, and it's actually attacking America on a lot of these areas as well. For the moment, China hasn't proposed an alternative, what it has. But all the signs, Sharif, are pointing to America continuing on this path. That's not the reality. The reality, America seems to be in decline. And it's now really a question of who's really going to replace America, who's got the alternative, and who's potentially going to challenge it.
And in terms of the Muslim world, because that's where, we started talking about petrodollars, really the petrol, the gas, a large amount of resources exist within the Muslim world. So could Muslims, unified, could they become the next global power?
Yeah, so the fact that America turned to Saudi, the fact that it turns to Muslim rulers regularly, it shows you the very strong position they're in, the very capable position they're in. Unfortunately, our rulers haven't taken advantage of this. In Saudi Arabia at the moment, Sharif, they've got all these grand plans to build these modern development smart cities. They're going to literally bankrupt the nation. There's no thinking in terms of how do we increase the technical and educational level in our countries? How do we become self-sufficient? How do we actually show the world this is how you should be living? There's so little confidence in the West at the moment. Even in the West, there's so little confidence in their own politicians. Really, the fact that America keeps going back to them shows you that there's something there. They've got resources, they've got mineral wealth. Unfortunately, the rulers just don't have that agenda. The people want to see the Muslim world improve. They can see we've got some of our resources, but our rulers rather invest in football clubs and baseball clubs in the West. So the Muslim world, absolutely. You've got 2 billion Muslims nearly in the world. They've got the same views on a lot of issues. They have a political system as well that they actually believe in. We just have these rulers, very few in number, a couple of families that really just need to be removed because they're actually getting in the way. But the groundwork, a lot of it's already there. Muslims would like to have a Muslim currency. They would like to have an Islamic currency. So the concept already exists. We don't need to introduce this into the Ummah.
Jazakallah khair, Adnan. Really appreciate you coming on. Inshallah, hopefully we'll get you back on again in the future. And also to the Political Alchemy viewers out there, alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair for watching today. Please like, share and subscribe, and be aware that we'll try to produce as many videos as possible on a variety of issues, on politics, on history, on ideological issues that affect the Muslims or the wider society, and give it from an authentic Islamic voice. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.